Good evening and welcome back. And just to reassure you, Casper is here too, because we are in fact isolating ourselves in Scotland. And we're doing this because the government recommends that anybody over 70 does isolate themselves. And so we've come up to Scotland, where there are very few people, a lot of sheep of course, and a lot of beautiful scenery. So I hope that things will go well. Now I'm going to make this a fairly short broadcast because we all, or most of us, will have heard the Prime Minister point to the fact that there may be many people whose lives have been shortened from what they would expect it to be by the coronavirus. So the coronavirus is all around us, and a lot of people are very afraid of what might happen. Now, what I want to do is to say that dying is not the terrible thing that we think it is. By that I mean that the actual process of dying is managed in many ways for us by the process itself. And so if you find that a relative or a friend is dying because of the coronavirus, then you can be certain that their whole death process is in many senses looked after. I mean, what I mean there is obviously the physical side will be because they'll be in hospital and have respirators and so on. But it's what the actual dying process is like. Now, I'm not going to go on with the amazing man, Monsieur Forget, F-O-R-G-E-T, forget, today, because I want to just concentrate, make this a fairly short video, and concentrate on nearing the end of life, a pamphlet for relatives of the dying. Now that can in fact be bought. I think it's about 2 shillings from Amazon. I can send it to you free, but of course I don't have them up here. Now this book is a very good book by Professor Alan Kelleher, and he has written a book about how people die, and it's excellent, and it's called The Inner Life of the Dying Person. And please, if somebody who you know is dying, you'll find that a very helpful book. Now, in some of the previous videos that I've done, you will in fact have all the data I'm going to talk about today, but really this is just a summary account of what will happen. So firstly, why are we all so panicked? Why are we all so afraid? Well, there's many reasons for this, because of a disturbance to our usual life situation, because of the possibilities that we can't carry out those projects which we want to. But underneath it all, there is the fear also that we may die. Now obviously if we're in our teens, early 20s or 30s, this isn't a problem. But if we are older, in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, then of course the possibility that we may die will be very frightening for us. Now remember that this is called existential fear of death. We all have it. It always goes out of proportion because we are a species that have been made to try and preserve ourselves. And so the fear that we have is the fear of death. It's a sort of inborn fear, and it changes our judgment. And you remember the story of the experiment with the judges, one of whom had the fact that they were going to die in their questionnaire and the others didn't. And the ones who had that question didn't know how much it altered and changed their behavior. And they were very punitive indeed, whereas the other ones weren't. So there are a number of factors which are brought on by the fear of death. So that's the first point. The next point is that as we come to the dying process itself, it begins with us wanting to respond to it quite often negatively. I'm not going to die, I'm not dying, is quite a common one. Then you're very sad because you're going to leave everybody. And then the next one may be that you're angry, why me, when it could be lots of other people. And so there is this response in you. Now I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, that your word is be curious. Be curious. So throughout the whole dying process, you must be curious. So let's move on a little then. And as we come up to the last fortnight or 3 weeks before we die, then we go through a phase when we may get deathbed visitors. Not all of us, but most of us. And these deathbed visitors are in fact, in our studies, 25% were relatives, 17% were spiritual people, then another 17% were relatives further down the chain, brothers, sisters, grandparents, and so on. You remember that I pointed out that we had very few angels in this country, and that if you wanted an angel, then you would have to go to the Bible belts of North America, where Dr. Lerma has done a lot of studies on who comes to collect the dying. So the deathbed visitors are there to help us. They're very comforting, they look after us, and they take us through the death process. And as we go through the death process, we then will go into another reality. This other reality is it's a transcendent reality, a lot of light, a lot of love, a lot of care, a lot of help. That's what the dying say. So there's no need to be afraid of this, because you will be looked after. Then you come back again into the hospice or into the hospital, wherever you are. And what will happen then is that after a little while, another deathbed visitor may come and take you back into this area. So you're sort of being familiarized with it. Now please, during this time, it is a time of massive cleaning. What do I mean by that? Massive cleaning is giving up your attachments. You give up, I would have to give up my attachment to this one here. There will be other attachments which we'll have to give up as well. Our family, our children, all those projects we have, our money, everything has to be given up. So that we come then now on to Dr. Monica Rentz's 3 stages of transition. First one is the giving up, and there is evidence, particularly from a little hospice who I talked to in Rotterdam, that at the time we are in this phase, there's usually a pulse of love in the room which helps us to cope with any old family tangles that we have and get our relationships right. It's very important you get your family relationships right. And as you go on, then you start clearing away all those things to which you are personally attached. Very important to do it. Being curious all the time. What's going to happen? What's coming next? Like that. And so you give up as much as you can, and then you will find that your sense of I, this internal sense of yourself, goes, and you go into what Monica calls the transition. This is a sort of resting phase, in which if you haven't given everything up, it's actually quite difficult. If you have, you rest there, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not so peacefully, and then you go through into post-transition, and this is where you become non-dual. Non-duality means that you feel yourself to be everything. The whole cosmos is within you. Love, light, and care are some of the major qualities of it. So it's a wonderful state to die in. And that seems to be, from that state, this state of bliss consciousness, transcendence, if you like, we go on with the dying process, and we die. Just a reminder that of course, we may not be able to do this in the current circumstances, but it's best to leave the body where it is until you feel it's empty. Now, what on earth do I mean by being empty? It's just simply this: you have the feeling that the body is empty, and with that feeling, there comes a point where the person leaves the body. It's just a feeling you have, and the body is then empty. It's just an empty casket, if you like. So it's best, if you can, to leave the body like that. But if there are, of course, lots of people dying in a ward situation, it'd be very difficult to do this. But just if you can remember it, then I think it's important. So that's a recap on the stages of dying. And please do not be afraid. The whole process appears to be looked after. And so there is really no need to be afraid. It's clearing, giving up, getting your relationships right, then into the transitions, and finally to becoming non-dual and going into this extended cosmic state. So we'll leave it there for today, and I hope to be able to do in the coming week another video as we take on the story of the amazing Alain Forget, his book How to Get Out of This World Alive, and his philosophy and the science behind meditation and the coupling that he seems to be able to produce with his mind and the minds of his students. So thank you very much. Very nice to see you again, and I hope that we'll be back soon. So from Scotland, goodbye.